Imagine yourself drifting slowly and without urgency through the stillness of a cosmos just beginning to bloom. There is no sound, not truly, only radiant waves of light curling through the void and clouds of dust circling distant stars. Among them, one star in a quiet corner of the galaxy glows just a little brighter than the rest. Around it, over time, something begins to form. Earth, not as we know it, but as a storm of rock and fire, molten rivers and raining meteors, a sky choked with ash and lightning, a young planet without names, without watchers, turning slowly under its seething crust. There is no life, no memory, no emotion, only motion, the long rhythm of gravity and chance. Over unimaginable spans of time, this chaos softens. The crust thickens. The rains fall for thousands of years. Oceans are born deep, dark, and silent. And under their weight, something new stirs. Simple, fragile, and unseen. Not yet life as we imagine it, but the first whispers of potential. Microscopic strands folding and unfolding in the warmth of mineral-rich waters. The building blocks of thought, resting quietly under ancient seas. No eyes have yet opened. No thoughts have yet formed. But the earth has begun to wait. Now imagine the ocean becoming crowded, slowly, almost lazily. Algae bloom and spread. Strange, soft-bodied creatures drift with the currents. There are no predators at first, just a quiet, gentle competition for light and nutrients. Life evolves, but without urgency. Over eons, some of these creatures grow fins, shells, spines. Others develop mouths and begin to move with more purpose, though there is still no memory, no reflection, only hunger, motion, repetition, and then the world is transformed again. The great Cambrian explosion fills the seas with life. Trilobites scurry. Jawless fish twist through the water. On land, nothing moves yet, only lichens and moss across volcanic stone. Eventually, the first forests rise. Towering ferns and strange woody trees. Insects grow to enormous sizes in the rich oxygen. Amphibians crawl from swamp to land. Reptiles follow. Then the giants. The age of the dinosaurs begins not with a roar, but with slow steps and hot breath. For millions of years, they walk the earth. The great herds graze, the predators stalk. But none of them, not even the cleverest, can wonder what the stars are or why the rain falls. There is no language, no symbols, no memory of the dead. They live, they eat, they mate, they sleep. And then they vanish. The world sighs once more in silence. After the last of the thunder lizards disappear, the earth grows quieter. No longer ruled by scale and fang, the planet softens its palate. In the underbrush, new creatures stir. Small, warm-blooded, careful. Mammals, their eyes are more aware. Their nights are longer, spent burrowed and alert. Over generations, they grow larger, smarter. Some climb trees. Some learn to forage in groups. Some begin to remember. The earth is still wild, but now minds are beginning to take shape. The primates emerge, curious, agile, observant. They begin to see patterns fruit that comes with the seasons, predators that move in silence, and places where the sun feels warm in the morning. They play, they nurture, they mourn. Slowly, the boundary between instinct and thought begins to blur. And then, one lineage begins to walk, not just upright, but forward into something new. The Ice Age tightens its grip. The The world turns cold and bright under layers of frost and wind. But in Africa, under the sun, a new being walks, not faster than the lion, not stronger than the elephant, but different, Homo sapiens. Their hands shape tools, their mouths form sound, their eyes look into the fire and see something no creature ever has: stories. They begin to remember not just places, but moments, not just food, but ancestors. They carry the past in their minds. On cave walls, they leave signs, lines, and figures, deer and men, shapes of hands like ghosts reaching through time. In the dark, they sit by firelight. Shadows flicker, voices murmur. They are no longer just surviving. They are becoming. The earth is no longer silent. Something has begun to speak. Picture a small shelter at the edge of a frozen plain. A family gathers around a glowing fire. Above them, the stars are distant and cold. But inside the cave, warmth pulses with memory. An elder hums softly. A child stares at the glowing embers. Another paints with ochre, fingers tracing lines on stone. This is not just survival. This is something else. Ritual, meaning. The first stories were not written. They were felt, passed from eyes to hands to voice, from firelight to dream. In this moment, the earth is no longer empty. It is inhabited by thought, by longing, by wonder. The planet that once spun silently under stars is now filled with whispers of ancestors, spirits, gods not yet named. And with that, we drift softly into the next part of our journey, where minds remember, where tribes wander, and where the breath of humanity deepens. The first stories were not told. They were felt in firelight and etched in ochre. These were the first nations of memory, of ancestors, of walking and waiting. Imagine the air, sharp and clean, brushing across your skin like glass. The wind howls softly across a frozen plain, carrying the scent of mammoth dung and pine smoke. Overhead, the sky stretches like a dome of stone, and under it, the earth is hard and white. Ice creaks in the distance. It is the last glacial maximum. About 20,000 years ago, the great ice sheets have descended across much of the northern world. North America lies buried beneath kilometers of ancient snow, as does much of northern Europe and Asia. But in the lands where the ice retreats and the wind bites less cruelly, life clings stubbornly. There, small bands of humans roam. They are wrapped in furs, feet padded with hide, hands rough from scraping sinew and shaping stone. They live in groups of perhaps 20 to 30, sometimes fewer. Every face is familiar, every gesture a shared story. There are no strangers. There is only us and the land. These humans do not write, but they remember. Memory is their library. The sky is their map. Their ancestors live in bones, in fire, in silence. Their world is not like yours. It has no nation, no time, no borders. But it is not empty. It is full with meaning, with ritual, with breath. The rhythm of their lives is not measured in minutes, but in hunger and warmth, in tracks across snow and the tilt of the sun. A day begins not with an alarm, but with the crackle of firewood and the faint smell of ash rising into frost. Perhaps a few stars still linger when they wake, nestled in skin-wrapped shelters. The fire is always the center. It is warmth, but also memory. Elders stare into the flames and murmur softly. Children listen, learning not only stories, but how to survive. No calendar tells them it is winter. They know it in the stiffness of their fingers, in the thickness of deer fur, in the long silences of birds. Long before pyramids or tombs, people buried their dead, not out of fear, not to hide decay, but to mark a journey. Bodies were placed with care, sometimes curled like sleepers, sometimes painted with red ochre, sometimes given beads, bones, or tools. In Sunjir, Russia, 2 Ice Age children were buried wearing thousands of ivory beads. Each bead would have taken hours to make. Who mourned them? What story was whispered as they were laid in the earth? Grief is ancient, so is remembrance. Burial is not just about death. It is about continuity. Those who are gone are not forgotten. They are stars now. Stones, winds, dreams. The living carry them through story, ritual, and sometimes through tattoos cut into skin. Death is not an end. It is a return. Fast forward not to the future, but to the present echo of the past. In the dry lands of southern Africa live the San people once called Bushmen, whose way of life offers a glimpse into how early humans may have lived for tens of thousands of years. They hunt with poisoned arrows. They gather tubers and mongongo nuts. But more importantly, they remember. The San are master storytellers. Around fires, they speak of the trickster god Kagan, who sometimes is a praying mantis, sometimes a man. Their rock art thousands of years old shows elans, dances, spirits, and trance. One ritual, the healing dance, involves rhythmic clapping and singing around a fire. As the dance goes on, the shamans enter a trance, their bodies trembling. They journey, they say, into the spirit world to heal, to see, to remember. This is not fiction, it is practice. The San remind us, memory is movement, spirit is breath, story is survival. Across the ocean, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia speak of the dreaming not a past event, but a timeless realm where ancestors walked, sang the world into being, and left behind the stories that shaped rivers, rocks, and trees. Each hill, each stream, each animal track is a verse in a song that must be remembered. Songlines are maps, but they are also prayers. By walking them, singing them, one remembers not just place, but the meaning of place. Aboriginal paintings are not illustrations. They are recordings memory encoded in dot and line, in color and shape. To forget a story is to unmake the land. So much of what we call history is based on writing. But what about memory before ink? How does a people remember without paper? Through repetition, through rhythm, through ritual, through the careful weaving of detail into song. In some Arctic traditions, place names are not just labels, but full sentences. The hill where the caribou was found after the third snow. In Polynesia, navigators remember ocean swells, star patterns, bird flights, and oceanic GPS built entirely on oral knowledge. In ancient Europe, the bard was a repository of history, law, and identity, a walking archive. Even today, some African griots can recite centuries of genealogy from memory, not as dry facts, but as stories alive, vibrant, evolving. Writing is powerful, but memory was first. Let us return now to the Ice Age, to a tribe sitting beneath stars, waiting for the hunt, for the thaw, for the return of the sun. In their stillness, there is knowing. In their movement, there is rhythm. They are not behind. They are not simple. They are complete. Their world is not less. It is whole. A world where every rock has a voice, every fire a spirit, every silence a story. A world that remembered. And so the Ice Age wanes. The glaciers retreat. The rains return. Seeds sprout where once there was frost. people begin to linger longer, to plant, to build, to wonder, what if we stayed? In the next segment, we'll walk quietly into this great change. From the hunters who remembered to the builders who believed, from cave walls to temple stones, from firelight to the first gods. But for now, you can rest here among the stars, the ashes, the footprints on snow long melted. You are safe. You are still. You remember. From soil and grain came hunger. From hunger came the gods. Let us begin again, slowly, gently, by returning to the earth. Not the earth of satellites or stories, not even the earth of kings and conquests, but a quieter earth, still whispering through the winds of a forgotten time. Close your eyes if you like, and imagine the air itself was younger then. The sky, unstained by artificial light, spread endlessly in every direction, a dark blue velvet scattered with stars too numerous to name. It is here, somewhere in the cradle of what we now call southeastern Turkey, that a group of humans looked upward and inward and placed stones in a circle. This was long before cities, long before the wheel turned or the plow sliced open the land, before the great epics were carved into tablets or carried by singers through the valleys. These people were hunters, foragers, gatherers. Their lives were shaped by the migrations of animals and the seasons of berries and grain. They lived lightly upon the earth, their camps temporary, their tools humble, their stories carried not in scrolls, but in breath and memory. And yet, something stirred within them, a dream, perhaps, or a need, something larger than survival, something deeper than shelter. And so they came to a hill that was not yet a ruin, a hill called Göbekli Tepe. The name means potbelly hill in Turkish, though that is not what the builders called it. Their language, whatever it was, has not survived, but their stones have, and the stones tell a quiet tale if you are patient enough to listen. Beneath layers of sediment and time, under the blanketing silence of 12,000 years, the stones waited. When they were finally uncovered in the late 20th century, the world of archaeology paused and gasped, not loudly, but like someone seeing the first light after a long darkness. For this hill concealed not the broken foundations of a village, nor the remains of some burial site. No, what emerged from the dust were pillars. Tall, upright, monolithic pillars arranged in perfect circles, each one carved with care, with deliberate lines that spoke not of chaos, but of belief. Some stood as high as 6 meters, towering above the heads of their makers. They were shaped like the letter T, though not for any alphabetical reason. These T-shaped pillars were smooth and cold to the touch, standing like sentinels. Some bore carvings animals mostly, but not in chaos. A fox stretched along the curve of one stone. A scorpion curled along another. Birds, snakes, boars, lions. Not random, but ordered. Not decoration, but meaning. There were no houses here. No signs of daily life. No hearths for cooking. No beds for sleeping. Just the stones, standing in quiet circles, some nested within each other like ripples in time. There were stairways descending into the earth, and wall segments built with astonishing precision, considering the lack of metal tools or pottery. There were enclosures deliberately buried, one atop another, as if each generation wished to cover the sacred space with care before building anew. And so we ask, what is this place? Why would nomadic people, who moved with the rhythms of animals and harvest, stop to raise something so monumental? Why carve so many stones, drag them across distances, and plant them upright in the earth? The answer is not entirely known. But perhaps, as we sink into this moment, we can feel toward a truth. Göbekli Tepe was likely not a place of shelter, but a place of gathering. A temple, perhaps, though not in the way we think of temples today. It was a space that pulled people in, that held them close, and asked them to consider something larger than the self. It may have been built not after agriculture, but before it. That is one of the most stunning aspects of this hill. It predates the rise of farming, of cities, of civilization itself. The stones came first. The stories came first. It was once thought that humans first settled down in order to farm, and that farming allowed for religion and temples to follow. But here, the sequence may be reversed. The sacred came first and settlement followed. This changes everything. Imagine now the people who stood beneath those pillars, their faces painted in ochre, their hands calloused from carving, their feet wrapped in animal skins, their breath visible in the cool air of early morning. They stood in a ring of stone and shadow, their voices raised not in language as we know it, but in chant or murmur or silence. Perhaps there was a fire in the center. Perhaps there was only starlight. But whatever took place within those circles, it mattered deeply. Enough to return, enough to rebuild. And perhaps, in time, it planted a seed. A different kind of seed, a kind not buried in soil, but in thought. For just beyond Göbekli Tepe, in the wide arc of the Fertile Crescent, other changes were stirring. People began to plant grains, to herd animals, to build walls not just around sacred stones, but around themselves. The age of foraging was slowly giving way to the age of farming. And with it came the age of ownership, of hierarchy, of gods with names and thrones. But even before all of that, before crowns and temples and kings, there were these stones. Silent, carved, and enduring. They are the first walls we know. Not walls for keeping out enemies, not walls for separating land, but walls for holding mystery, for containing the ineffable, for remembering the dream. And as you drift now, deeper into thought, deeper into the folds of time, let yourself picture the way the stars might have looked above those first builders. Let your mind follow the shape of a carved fox along a limestone curve. Let your breathing match the rhythm of ancient wind moving through grass. There is no hurry here. The stones will wait. They always have. And so with the temple of Göbekli Tepe gently fading into the distance behind us, we continue forward along the slow river of time, to the next place where humans would gather not in circles of stone, but in cities of clay and brick, to the lands between two rivers, to Sumer. The air thickens not with fog, but with meaning, with dust. With time, we drift east and slightly south from Göbekli Tepe, carried not by wind or wagon, but by memory. The land changes subtly beneath us. Green hills give way to flat, silty plains. Here the earth is fertile, impossibly so, fed by the embrace of two rivers whose names will echo through eternity, the Tigris and the Euphrates. We are now in Mesopotamia. It is a strange name Greek, not native, meaning simply between the rivers. But the people who lived here did not think of their home in terms of geography. To them, it was the Abzu, the place of cosmic waters, or Eden, the wide and open plain. This was not simply land. It was the meeting point of the divine and the earthly, a place where gods touched mud, and the mud came to life. And it is here that the first cities were born. But not suddenly, not all at once. The journey from foraging to farming, from shelter to settlement, unfolded slowly, like a tree sending out roots long before it bears fruit. Even before cities rose, people gathered. They dug irrigation ditches, collected wild grains, domesticated sheep and goats. They pressed reeds into wet clay, perhaps at first just to mark ownership or measure barley. But the clay remembered, and soon the marks became language. We begin this part of our journey in Eridu, if the Sumerians are to be believed, and in some quiet, dreamlike way, they must be then Eridu was the first city. The first. Eridu was built before the flood, they said. Not a local flood, not a seasonal event. The flood, the great cleansing tide, the same flood that later found its way into the Epic of Gilgamesh, and later still into the story of Noah. In Eridu, the gods first walked upon the earth. In Eridu, civilization began. Let us walk slowly among the ruins. There is very little left today, just the faint outline of mud brick platforms, now eroded by time and sun. The city once rested on the edge of a lagoon, where fresh water met salt. In the Sumerian mind, this mingling of waters was more than natural. It was divine. For beneath all things, they believed, flowed the Abzu, the deep underground ocean, where wisdom lived. The god Enki, patron of Eridu, was lord of this Abzu. He was not distant or aloof, like later gods would become. He walked among men. He advised kings. He designed the first temples. His house was called the Abzu, the house of the deep waters. It was part temple, part cosmic gateway. In time, other cities would copy its layout. But Eridu's temple stood first, a raised platform of mud brick, resting on the sacred waters. Its floors were polished, its inner chamber cool and silent. Not a place for worship as we know it today, but a place of presence. The god was there. His statue, if there was one, was not merely symbolic. It was inhabited. To step inside the temple was to step into a realm where the boundaries between flesh and spirit, between man and God, dissolved. From Eridu, civilization spread like ripples in a still pool. Next came Ur, then Lagish, then Urukich, a little larger, a little more complex. Cities rose not from conquest, but from gathering. They were spiritual centers first. The walls came later. And it is in Uruk that we find something extraordinary. Let your breath slow here. For Uruk was not merely a city. It was a turning point in the human story. At its height, it may have housed 40,000 people, an astonishing number for its time. Its walls, as later myth would tell us, were built by a king named Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine and 1/3 man. But the truth is even more remarkable. Here, for the first time in history, a city was divided into districts, temple quarters, administrative zones, residential blocks. There were canals for water, granaries for storage, workshops for artisans. People specialized. One baked bread. Another spun thread. Another sang epics at twilight. No longer did everyone do everything. A structure had begun to form, not just of buildings, but of society itself. The heart of Uruk was not a palace, but a ziggurat. A towering stepped structure of mud brick, its base wide and solid, its upper tiers narrower as they climbed toward the sky. Atop it stood a temple, reaching not just upward, but inward. To ascend the ziggurat was to leave the world of markets and mortality behind. At each level, the noise of the city faded until only the sky remained. This was the house of Inanna, goddess of love and war, fertility and chaos. She was a paradox, soft and brutal, seductive and terrifying. Her priestesses walked barefoot through the city, their rituals shrouded in secrecy. Inanna was not the wife of a god, or the mother of one. She was the storm. She was power incarnate. And in Uruk she ruled. And yet, the temples of Sumer were not just homes for gods. They were banks, warehouses, centers of power. People brought offerings not just of devotion, but of barley, of livestock, of labor. The priests recorded everything in clay tablets, first pictograms, then syllables, then true script. Writing was born not from poetry, but from accounting. Civilization, it turns out, began with a ledger. Let us pause now. Imagine standing on the edge of Uruk's great wall, just as the sun dips below the horizon. The city stretches before you, its rooftops like uneven teeth, its alleys glowing with the fires of evening meals. Somewhere, a lyre plays a gentle tune. A mother rocks her child in a reed basket. The smell of baked fish, of roasted onions, drifts on the warm breeze. In the distance, a ziggurat casts a long shadow, reaching toward you, and you feel it, that something immense has begun. Not a moment, a movement, a turning, from gathering to ruling, from worship to ownership, from gods who lived in trees and rivers, to gods who sat in gilded rooms, tended by priests and protected by kings. The divine had become institutional, powerful, necessary. And with that power came something new, permanence. Where the people of Gozekli Tepe built temples but left no homes, the Sumerians built cities designed to last. They dug canals. They codified laws. They married sky and soil. And they built walls not just to mark space, but to mark identity. Inside was order. Outside was chaos. The first walls were sacred. The next walls were civil. And in their bricks sun-dried, hand-pressed, inscribed, we find not only the beginning of history, but the beginning of us. Let us begin again, not at the throne, but at the tablet. The clay tablet, unfired, small enough to hold in one palm, still soft from the riverbanks of the Euphrates. Someone has just finished pressing a reed stylus into its surface swift. Exacting strokes, tiny wedge-shaped indentations arranged in rows. The writing is not alphabetical. It is not even truly pictorial. It is cuneiform from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge. And it is the beginning of history. Because history does not truly begin when things happen. History begins when things are written down. But how did it begin? How did the murmured chants of priests and the spoken bargains of farmers become language made durable in earth? The story is not about inspiration. It is about necessity. We return to Uruk, around 3200 BCE. The city is bustling, teeming with activity traders arriving from distant lands with baskets of obsidian, lapis lazuli, and dried dates. Scribes collecting tallies of goats and jars of barley for the temple storehouses. Priests preparing offerings for Inanna. The city pulses with life, but also with logistics. There are records to be kept, obligations to be remembered, inventories to be reconciled. And so the people of Uruk began to mark clay. At first, the marks were simple tokens, clay spheres, or cylinders representing a sheep, a portion of grain, a container of oil. These tokens were sometimes sealed inside larger clay envelopes, called bula, marked on the outside with symbols showing what was inside. Eventually, it became unnecessary to use the tokens at all. Instead, The symbols themselves impressed directly into wet clay became the language, and then the symbols evolved. From this humble system, 1,000 years of refinement would give rise to true writing. Cuneiform could now record not just goods, but names, not just quantities, but actions. He gave, they built. The king decreed, and with that leap, memory extended beyond the grave. The first known name in history, preserved in cuneiform, is not that of a god or hero. It is Coshin, an accountant. His tablet reads simply, 29,086 measures barley, 37 months. Kojum. This is no epic poem, and yet, in some ineffable way, it is more profound. It marks the transition from myth to method, from oral to eternal. We know Kushum lived. We know what he did. The clay remembers. And that is what writing was, at its core not art, but administration. Yet, as with all things human, the mundane gave birth to the sublime. Soon, writing was not just about recording what was, but about imagining what could be. And from those imaginings came the stories that would define civilizations. Enter Enmerkar, a mythic king of Uruk. His name appears in texts older than even Gilgamesh. In the legend of Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata, he is credited with inventing writing itself. According to the story, messengers between kings grew weary of remembering ever-lengthening messages. And so Enmerkar devised a way to send his words upon clay. This wasn't just invention, it was revolution. The ability to speak across distance and time. But what of kings? Where did they come from? In early Sumer, power was not originally hereditary. City assemblies' elders and warriors likely chose leaders for specific tasks. War, harvest, trade. These leaders were called Lugal, meaning big man. Over time, however, some Lugals refused to step down. They claimed divine favor. They built temples not for the gods, but in their own names. They controlled land, and writing now served them. Thus the city-state was born. Each Sumerian city, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Nippur, was an independent kingdom with its own deity, temple, and king. They were not united. They were siblings, sometimes rivals, sometimes allies. Wars were common, but not yet apocalyptic. The kings recorded their battles in stone, listing cities conquered, canals built, and temples erected in their honor. From this web of kings and cities, the first epic would rise. Let us now meet Gilgamesh. Not just a king, not just a name, but a pattern. He lived perhaps sometime around 2700 BCE, ruling over Uruk. His deeds became legend, his arrogance, his grief, his search for immortality. The Epic of Gilgamesh is often called the first work of literature, but it is more than that. It is the first recorded crisis of meaning. Gilgamesh is powerful, but afraid. He builds walls to enshrine his glory, but they do not satisfy him. He seeks eternal life, first through friendship with Enkidu, then through conquest, then through wisdom. But in the end, all he is left with is his story and the city he built. It is a story we still tell ourselves today. In the tablets of Gilgamesh, we find the earliest philosophical questions. What is the purpose of power? Can death be escaped? What does it mean to leave a legacy? The answers, if they exist, lie not in the text, but in the act of writing itself. Because writing true writing gave humanity a mirror, a way to see itself beyond the present moment, to reflect, to remember, to grieve, to plan, and it transformed power. A king's command could now outlive his breath. Laws could be carved in stone. Taxes could be tracked. Property could be owned, not just held, but proven. Literacy became a kind of sorcery, accessible only to scribes trained in temple schools. They spent years copying tablets, learning the intricacies of grammar, the shapes of signs, the names of long-dead kings. They were not mere recorders, they were guardians of the past. With time, writing extended beyond temples and palaces. We find love letters, school exercises, jokes, complaints to merchants. A father writes to his son, scolding him for neglecting his studies. A woman writes a hymn to Inanna, filled with longing. A priest catalogues omens from the movement of stars and the livers of sacrificed sheep. And yet, amidst this growing chorus of voices, the structure of Sumer remained brittle. City warred with city. Crops failed. Rivers shifted course. And eventually, a great change arrived not from within, but from without. A people from the north. They spoke a different language. They had no temples like those of Sumer, but they understood power. Their leader was a man named Sargon of Akkad, and in time, he would unite all of Sumer and more into the world's first true empire. But that is for the next part. For now, we end where we began, with a tablet, unassuming, fragile, a sliver of mud pressed by a human hand 5,000 years ago. And yet, it still speaks. In it are the whispers of markets and temples, of gods and kings, of grief and glory, of people who once lived, loved, ruled, rebelled, and wrote. The first walls held back beasts and winds, but the walls of clay, they held back time. The sun rose red and low over the Mesopotamian plain, its light catching the glint of bronze spear tips and banners rippling in the heat. Somewhere near the city of Kish, once the heartbeat of Sumerian authority, a new force stirred. Not a god, not a priest-king from the temples of Uruk. No, this man had no birthright of rule. He was not born in a palace. He was born in shadow, and yet he would rise to seize the world. His name was Sargon Sharukin in Akkadian, meaning the true king, a man who emerged, as if by fate, from the dust between worlds. Let us trace his path, slowly, thoughtfully, because Sargon of Akkad was not merely a warlord or ruler. He was an idea that power could be made, not just inherited. An idea that one city did not need to remain small and proud, but could dream of swallowing the earth. Sargon's origins are almost mythical. Like Moses, like Romulus, he was said to have been born in secret and placed in a basket of reeds, floated down a river by his mother, a priestess who could not raise him herself. The river carried him to Aki, a gardener in the service of the king of Kish. Aki raised the child as his own, a gardener's boy, nothing more. But already we see something new in this myth. This wasn't a son of gods. He was not descended from the heavens like Gilgamesh or Enmerkar. He was of the earth. Mud, sweat, survival. In time, he rose through service. He became a cupbearer to the king of Kish, a high position for a foreigner, for Sargon was of Semitic origin, speaking Akkadian, not Sumerian. His roots were nomadic. The language of his people was different. Their gods were similar but separate. And yet, somehow, he rose, and then he seized power. We do not know exactly how. The tablets are incomplete. Perhaps the king died. Perhaps there was betrayal. Perhaps a quiet coup in the night. What we do know is that Sargon overthrew the king of Kish, took command of the city, and march south. An empire is not just a kingdom made large. It is something altogether different. A kingdom assumes shared identity, one people, one god, one place. An empire assumes diversity under dominance. Sargon ruled over Sumerians, Akkadians, Elamites, Amorites, each with different languages, customs, and gods. But they were all now part of a single political unit. To make this work, he needed more than soldiers. He needed infrastructure. He maintained roads. He stationed garrisons across his territory. He sent messages on tablets carried by swift messengers. Inscriptions boast that he crossed the sea in ships, that he reached the land of cedar forests, that his rule stretched from the lower sea to the upper sea, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. These boasts may contain exaggerations, but the truth beneath them is undeniable. Sargon expanded the known world. For the first time in history, people across vast distances paid taxes to the same king. No reign, however grand, is without cracks. Sargon's empire was vast, but not invincible. He spent much of his later years putting down rebellions, city after city rising up in protest. Perhaps they resented foreign rule. Perhaps they hated the taxes. Or perhaps they simply remembered being free. But Sargon always returned with armies. He claimed victory after victory. Some say he ruled for 56 years. Some say he never lost a battle. Whether this is true or mythic bravado, it is clear he was respected and feared. And eventually bring about its downfall. Sargon was more than a conqueror. He was a prototype. After him, every empire from Babylon to Persia, from Rome to Britain, would carry some of his blueprint. He proved that authority could be constructed, not inherited. That cities could be conquered not just by sword, but by system. That identity, Akkadian, Sumerian, Elamite, could be woven into one political tapestry. And he showed that the world was not too big to rule, only too disorganized. From the mud of Kish to the throne of all Mesopotamia, Sargon reshaped history. And when he was gone, the world remembered. His name would be evoked for centuries, his empire mourned, his victories retold. But already, even before his bones turned to dust, the signs of decay had begun. Empires rise, empires consolidate, and then empires crack, because what is built in the name of one man must often fall when he is no longer there. As the great rivers of Mesopotamia carved laws into clay, far beyond their reach, other rivers flowed too, quietly, patiently, across lands untouched by the cuneiform gaze. In India, fire was offered with hymns that had no temples. In China, the bones of turtles cracked beneath the hands of diviners. Across the Nile, death was shaped like a journey through stars. And on the wind-worn plateaus of the Andes and the cool forests of Europe, stone rose in silence, with meaning we still cannot read. The world was no longer just Sumer and Akkad. It had begun to branch into rituals of flame, gods of stone, tongues of thunder, and kings with names lost to wind. This is the age of forgotten kingdoms and ancient faiths, a time before empires stretched wide, when humanity lived in many minds, each telling the world a different story. While rivers gave water, gods gave meaning. Every tribe, every tongue, painted the world with new names. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the scent of wet earth after summer rain. A fire crackles gently under a canopy of stars. The voices around it are steady and slow, not telling a story, but singing it, not from a book, but from breath. This is ancient India, but not the one of bustling temples and carved deities. Not yet. This is a world older than Sanskrit epics, older than palaces and kings, a world of nomads, of rivers, of fire. We begin with two great mysteries. One was buried in brick, in the ruins of the Indus Valley, cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, whose streets ran straight, whose drains still whisper of an order we do not understand. No grand statues of kings, no war monuments, no clear gods. Just seals, animals, and silent baths. The other was sung by the Vedic tribes who did not build cities, but carried fire with them. They called it Ugni, the living flame, and they sang to it in hymns known as the Rig Veda, the world's oldest surviving religious text still in use. Let us stay a while in both worlds, one of stone, the other of sound. Imagine walking through Mohenjo-Daro at dusk. The sun sets over flat rooftops. The streets, laid with an exactness that modern cities sometimes envy, grow quiet. There is no temple towering above, no palace shining with gold. But something lingers in the air, a sense of shared life. Every house has a private well. Every block has a bath. Archaeologists once thought this must be a civilization built without kings, without war, without gods. But perhaps its secrets were simply kept in forms we can no longer see. Its script, pressed into seals of soapstone and copper, remains undeciphered. A unicorn appears often. Or is it a bull? There are women in bangles, meditating figures, strange horned creatures. But no Rosetta Stone, no great inscriptions to translate their world. So we are left with whispers and patterns. The cities were gridded, the bricks uniform, the weights precise. They traded with Mesopotamia, lapis lazuli, cotton, spices. And then, around 1900 BCE, they began to fade. Not all at once, not in flames, but like a song slowly forgotten. Was it climate? Drought? River shifts? Or something else? We do not know. But as the bricks crumbled, another rhythm rose, not from the earth, but from fire and sky. Somewhere in the forests of northwest India and Pakistan, a different people sang to the wind. They called themselves Arya, not a race, but a word for noble. They did not write, but remembered. And what they remembered, they passed on, not in scrolls, but in sound. Their sacred verses, the Vedas, were chanted for centuries before anyone dared to write them down. And so we find ourselves in a world where the divine was heard, not seen. A world without temples, without idols, without priests as rulers. Instead, there were rishis, seers, sages, who saw truth in the patterns of flame and cloud. They sang of Indra, god of thunder, who slayed the dragon Vritra and released the waters. They praised Ugni, the fire god, who carried offerings to the heavens. They spoke of Rita, the cosmic order, and of Dharma, long before it became a law. Life was cyclical, the soul eternal. Death was a pause, not an end. Cattle were sacred, not as idols, but as life-givers. Sacrifice was sacred, not as death, but as transformation. And over time, these nomads who once wandered began to settle. Villages grew. Kingdoms formed. The Varna system, a social division, not yet rigid caste, took shape. And slowly, the India of fire and forest became the India of kings and temples. But in this early age, in the age of flame, the gods did not live in stone. They lived in songs. The air in ancient China was thick with mist, not just from the rivers and rains, but from memory itself. In this world, the past was never truly gone. It lingered in the names of the dead, in the shrines lit with careful offerings, and in the bones that cracked in the heat of sacred fire. Here, in the cradle of the Yellow River civilization, the divine did not dwell on distant mountaintops or in sculpted heavens. Instead, the gods were family. The dead were not gone. They were watching. And in this reverent quiet, a strange ritual emerged, one that still stirs the imagination today. Oracle bone divination. Long before the Great Wall snaked across the northern hills before, Confucius shaped the ethics of an empire, and long before the emperors of the Qin and Han rose and fell, China was a patchwork of warring tribes and growing settlements. The most powerful among these, the Shang dynasty, flourished between 1600 and 1046 BCE in the Central Plains. They did not build ziggurats or pyramid temples. They did not carve their gods into statues. But what they did leave behind was both eerie and profound. Buried in royal tombs and cracked by flame, the Shang gave us thousands of fragments of scapulae and turtle plastrons, carved with the earliest known form of Chinese writing. These weren't just records. They were questions. Imagine standing in a palace courtyard as the sun begins to dip. A diviner kneels beside a fire, a polished ox scapula in his hands. He inscribes it carefully, not with stories, but with questions. Will it rain tomorrow? Should we go to war? Will the king's consort give birth to a son? Have the ancestors accepted our offering? Once inscribed, the bone is held to the fire until it cracks. The shape of the crack is then read by a diviner, not unlike how a fortune teller reads tea leaves, but here it is divine communication. The crack is the reply, a conversation across worlds, and the answer is also carved onto the bone. Some of these even include the final outcome. It rained. We won. She gave birth to a boy. We now know these as the oracle bones, and they are more than just early texts. They're proof of something remarkable, that in ancient China, the earliest known writing system was born not from trade or law, but from a need to speak with the dead. To understand the Shang mind is to understand their view of the cosmos, not as a battlefield of gods and demons, but as an extension of the household. At the center of Shang religion was ancestor worship. The deceased were believed to retain power, influence, and awareness, especially royal ancestors. The king, as a living descendant, had to constantly maintain communication with them. If he failed, chaos could follow: floods, famine, or military defeat. Offerings were made at altars, sacrifices performed, sometimes of animals, sometimes of humans. Bronze vessels were crafted in their honor, elaborate, hauntingly beautiful, inscribed with names and deeds. To the Shang, your bloodline wasn't just your identity. It was your bridge to heaven. And heaven? It wasn't a paradise. It was a continuation of family, only more powerful. At the top of this spiritual family tree stood a force called Shangdi, the high god, but even he wasn't worshipped directly by most people. Only the king, through his royal ancestors, could mediate with Shangdi. The king was not a god, but he was the chief priest, the conduit between worlds. Alongside this mystical reverence for the dead was a very real, very material symbol of power: bronze. The Shang are renowned for their mastery of bronze casting, and their ceremonial bronze vessels remain among the most stunning artifacts of the ancient world. These weren't simple tools or weapons. They were used in ancestor rituals, often filled with wine, food, and blood offerings. Many were buried with the dead, never meant to be used again. Some were inscribed with details of victories, family lineages, and divine communications, a kind of spiritual resume in metal. And unlike Mesopotamian or Egyptian metallurgy, which often emphasized function or narrative art, Shang bronzes were imbued with mystery. Their designs are dense, abstract, and fierce, featuring Taudi, a mythical face or beast, perhaps meant to guard or intimidate. These bronzes were not decorative. They were sacred tools of cosmic balance. Modern archaeologists were stunned when they began to decipher these bones in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. For centuries, they had been sold as dragon bones in Chinese apothecaries, ground into powder for traditional medicine. It was only later that scholars recognized the inscriptions as ancient Chinese script. What followed was an explosion of knowledge. From these fractured bones, we learned the calendar systems of early China, including lunar months and solar observances, the names of royal lineages, their marriages, military campaigns, and even hunting trips, the rise and fall of cities, the questions that haunted early kings, which mirror those that haunt us even now. And yet, much remains unknown. Not all characters can be read. Not all meanings are clear. The Shang script was a predecessor to modern Chinese, but like the Indus script, parts of it remain elusive. We can sense the world it came from, but we cannot fully enter it. Eventually, the Shang dynasty fell to the Zhou, a new line of rulers who introduced the concept of the mandate of heaven, the idea that a ruler's legitimacy came from virtue and cosmic harmony. If the king grew corrupt, heaven could revoke its support, justifying rebellion. This idea of rule by moral order would shape Chinese political thought for millennia. Yet even as dynasties changed, the rituals endured. Ancestor worship remained central. Oracle bones faded, but divination and feng shui rose. The family stayed at the center of the cosmos, and writing, once carved in bone, began to be painted on bamboo slips and etched into stone. From the cracked whispers of the Shang to the scrolls of later philosophers, China's sacred conversation with its past never stopped. It only evolved. Let us now travel west, far from the river valleys and royal bones, beyond the terraced steppes of the Nile and the jade vessels of the Shang. Here, the wind whistles over open plains, through hills green with moss and centuries. The people left no written language, no golden tombs, no named kings, and yet they raised stones, colossal stones, heavy as houses, shaped, aligned, and placed with astonishing care. They did not write their prayers, but instead pointed them at the sky. The story of early Europe is not one of pyramids or empires. It is a story written in earth, bone, and shadow, where ritual was rooted deep in soil and seasons, and sacredness was not a figure or a god, but a place. From the standing stones of Brittany, to the brooding rings of Avebury, to the silent axis of Stonehenge, an entire continent of ancient peoples spent centuries moving stones taller than men, weighing tons across vast stretches of land. to build something they could never fully explain in words. But the stones remember. Long before Greece carved its columns or Rome paved its roads, Europe was already ancient. By the time Stonehenge reached its final phase, the pyramids of Egypt were already weathering under the sun. But the European megalithic tradition began much earlier, as far back as 4500 BCE, perhaps even before. There were no great cities here, no empire, no centralized priesthood. What there was continuity, a culture of ritual, of stone and burial, spreading across millennia. And despite the absence of writing, we are not completely lost. Through archaeology, through alignments, and through patterns in the bones and stars, we begin to piece together a worldview that was cosmic, seasonal, and deeply sacred. The earliest ritual structures in prehistoric Europe weren't stone circles. They were tombs, long earthen mounds built over stone chambers, known as barrows or passage graves. Imagine a hill, quiet in the countryside, but beneath it lies a carefully built stone chamber, aligned with the rising sun. The dead were placed here not to be forgotten, but to remain present, to guard the land, perhaps to guide the living. The great tombs of Newgrange in Ireland and Meshow in Scotland, constructed over 5,000 years ago, are aligned with solar events, such as the winter solstice sunrise. On that one morning each year, the rising sun enters a narrow passage, illuminating the innermost chamber in golden light, a rebirth of light in the darkest time. This is not coincidence. This is astronomy. This is memory, carved in stone and sun. By around 3000 BCE, the megalithic culture began to shift from tombs to circles and standing stones. All across the Atlantic coasts of Europe, from Portugal to Orkney, from Brittany to the British Isles, enormous stones were quarried, transported, and erected upright, often in complex geometrical or astronomical patterns. These are not random alignments. Carnac, in Brittany, features rows of thousands of stones, some over 4 meters tall, stretching across kilometers in deliberate order. Callanish, in the Hebrides of Scotland, forms a cruciform circle aligned with lunar standstills, rare events in the moon's 18.6-year cycle. And of course, there is Stonehenge, the most famous of all, aligned with the summer solstice sunrise and winter solstice sunset. But what were these for? Temples? Calendars? Burial grounds? The answer, likely, is all of the above and more. The builders of these monuments may have lacked writing, but they had something just as powerful, a calendar in the sky. To them, the sun and moon weren't distant objects. They were living cycles, rhythms by which the land lived or died. Planting, harvesting, birth, death, all depended on understanding the seasons. And what better way to remember the turning points, the solstices, equinoxes, and lunar events than to mark them permanently in stone? The circles may have been gathering places for ritual, for feasting, for mourning, for decision-making. They were built to last longer than memory itself. Stone, after all, does not forget. Though megaliths rose to the sky, they were also rooted in death. Many stone circles are located near burial mounds, and in some cases, bones were found buried within or beneath the stones themselves. The dead, it seems, were not just buried. They were invited to remain. Much like the Shang kings or Egyptian pharaohs, these prehistoric Europeans may have seen the ancestors as watchers, spirits who guided, judged, and protected. Their presence in ritual spaces suggests a communal relationship with the past, not as a chapter closed, but as a circle continuing. Across hundreds of sites, we see patterns: circles, ellipses, axes, and avenues. Stones placed to mark the cardinal directions. Openings aligned with eclipses, solstices, and moonrises. These weren't accidents. They weren't superstitions. They were expressions of knowledge, passed down orally, refined through observation, and finally carved into the earth. The builders likely understood how to track time with gnomons, how to watch the horizon's changes, and how to predict astronomical events with surprising accuracy. And still, despite all this, they never told us their names. Among all the megalithic wonders, Stonehenge stands alone in fame and in mystery. Built in phases over nearly 1,500 years, its earliest stage dates to around 3100 BCE, with wooden posts. The familiar stone circle we know was set in place around 2500 BCE using two kinds of stones: Sarson's bluestones, transported over 200 kilometers from Wales. The construction would have required hundreds of people, coordinated labor, and incredible planning. Its alignment with the solstices suggests ritual use, but whether for the sun god, the ancestors, or the health of crops, we still do not know. Burials found at the site include people from distant lands, suggesting Stonehenge may have been a pilgrimage center, a shared sacred space, perhaps the heart of a spiritual network across Neolithic Britain. What makes this world so different, so haunting, is that it left no text, no epic poems, no priestly decrees, no royal boasts carved in stone, and yet it speaks through the careful symmetry of circles, through bones laid with care, through stones placed to catch the light of a single dawn each year. This was a culture of watching, of waiting, of remembering in silence. It did not glorify kings. It glorified cycles of sun and seed, of death and rebirth, of cold and warmth. We cannot read their prayers, but we walk among them still. The barrows remain. The stones still catch the rising sun. People gather every year to mark the solstice, just as they may have done 5,000 years ago. The megalith builders vanished, absorbed into later cultures, displaced by time and bronze and empire, but their great works endure. And in that endurance, we find a reminder that even in silence, the human spirit builds, yearns, and remembers. While rivers gave water, gods gave meaning. Every tribe, every tongue, painted the world with new names. Below, two mighty rivers move like silver threads through a quilt of green, the Indus to the west, and the early courses of the Ganges to the east. Along their banks, time itself seems slower. The soil is heavy with memory, though no one yet remembers. Toward the forests and rivers that cradle another tradition, one not written in brick, but breathed into being with each sunrise. They are rivers of sound, composed, recited, and refined for centuries before ink ever met palm leaf. And they tell of a people whose world is song, where fire is not just warmth or light, but the bridge between this world and another. At every ritual, fire is lit, fed with ghee and grains, as priests chant mantras with syllables as precise as mathematics. Every word matters. Every rhythm echoes the rhythm of the cosmos. These are the Vedic tribes, pastoral and mobile, their memories stored not in tablets, but in the lungs and tongues of poets. Their gods are not quiet like the Indus spirits. These gods roar like fire, race like wind, thunder from the sky with chariots of storm. Ugni, the fire god, is the mouth of sacrifice. Soma, The drink of ecstasy flows like divine nectar through their rituals. Indra, the warrior of the heavens, slays the serpent of drought and releases the rains. These are not metaphors to them. They are truths shaped in verse, passed from father to son, teacher to student, across hundreds of years before ever being written. The sky is vast and mild, and at dawn, mists curl over the water as if the breath of some sleeping god still lingers from the night. Imagine the land from above, long before the borders we know today. The air is warm, but not harsh. But the first verses are being composed, not by pen nor chisel, but by flame and drum and the steady rhythm of feet on forest paths. The script they used remains undeciphered, like a door with no key. We cannot read their prayers, if they had them, nor their stories, if they told them. But we can observe the symmetry of their lives, the way their cities were gridded with intention, how even their public baths suggest a ritual cleanliness that goes beyond practicality. These were not merely engineers, they were seekers of harmony. Here we find two worlds emerging. One, ancient even now, lies in the ruins of brick cities along the Indus. The other, spoken rather than built, hums with hymns carried by tribes who move with the seasons, leaving no monuments, only echoes. This is a land not yet called India, not yet cut into kingdoms or faiths, not yet sung into epic. We begin in the west, where the Indus River curls like a patient serpent through plains that will one day hold Karachi and Mohenjo-daro. But for now, there are no cities, only growing clusters of baked brick homes, laid with care, aligned with the stars. These people do not write stories, but they make things, seals with strange animals, beads of carnelian and lapis lazuli, figurines of bulls and women, symbols of power and fertility. Their cities are clean, their drainage precise, their architecture humble but ordered. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa are not kingdoms, and there are no known kings, only craftsmen, merchants, potters, farmers, and perhaps priests. No temples rise from the earth, no palaces claim the sun, yet something deep, almost invisible, pulses through this civilization, a reverence for water, for order, for silence. This is the Harappan world, and though it will one day fade into dust and debate, its spirit lingers in ways modern scholarship still trusp. Now shift your gaze eastward. The Vedas, born of this oral tradition, are not mere books. This early Vedic world does not yet have temples or idols. There is no image of God to sculpt. Instead, the divine is summoned through language, honored through precision. The yajna, the fire sacrifice, becomes the great spiritual act. Around it, society takes shape. The priest, the warrior, the herdsman, the servant, not yet a fixed caste, but roles emerging through the needs of ritual and community. Then is not to walk through an empire, but a forest of sacred worlds. Each village has its guardian spirit, each river its goddess, each tree, perhaps, an echo of divinity. And above all, the fire burns, not as destruction, but as offering, as memory, as the tongue through which humans speak to gods. And yet, these Vedic tribes are not alone. The rhythms of chants still echo faintly in the wind. The Ganges continues her journey, indifferent but eternal. The Vedic fires fade into ash, but their smoke still curls through the philosophies of future centuries. And in the bricks of Harappa, crumbling but proud, something silent watches still, as if waiting for its name to be spoken once again. As they move into the Gangetic Plains, they encounter others, settled people with different gods, older customs. And the flames dim. From the sacred syllables of India, we cross eastward into the ancient bones of another world, a land of dragons, ancestors, and bones carved with questions for the sky. The Vedic vision, already immense, begins to deepen. The hymns grow more philosophical. Another world thrives, the world of ritual, of festivals, of prayers and offerings. The common people still chant the older hymns, still light the fire at weddings, still remember the rain-bringing Indra with song. Myth and meditation now walk side by side. India has split, not in conflict, but in depth. Sacredness is now layered, like the folds of a sari, each fold older than the last. The question of truth itself arises. What is the self? What is the world? Is there something eternal beyond all gods? Some scholars believe these were the remnants of Harappan society. Others suggest local tribal groups, forest dwellers, bearers of their own myths and medicines. Whatever the case, a blending begins. Fire altars rise where once stood Harappan wells. New deities appear. Rudra, the storm god who will one day become Shiva. Vishnu, still quiet in the Vedas, but destined to become the great preserver of worlds. Here, India's sacred mosaic begins to take form, not with conquest, but with convergence. From these questions come the Upanishads, late Vedic texts that whisper more than they proclaim. Gone is the chariot thundering Indra, the sky-clashing drama. In his place, silence. A seer sits beneath a tree and says, "You are that, tat fam asi." The divine is not distant, but within. The fire still burns, but now it is a metaphor. The real Yaina is internal. The cosmos lives in breath, in awareness, in stillness. And yet, even as this philosophical current flows quietly through hermitages and forest schools, to walk through early India, as we leave this sacred land behind, now let the rivers quiet. This is not the Africa of colonial maps or European myths. This is the Africa of long memory and sacred ground, of ancient rainfall rhythms, of stones that speak, and of beliefs that were never written, but never forgotten. We're not here to rush through it. We're here to listen, to breathe, to let the story emerge slowly, like footsteps in dust, each one deeper than the last. Then let us begin, slowly, as always, with silence. There is no noise here, no hum of machines, no cities, deep sound of feet on earth, feet that have been walking here since long before there were calendars, long before Africa was a word. No metal, only the wind rushing through acacia trees, only the echo of cicadas rising and falling with the heat. And although the air here is not empty, it's thick with memory, with the breath of people who lived and died over and over, long before the Nile was a name on any map, long before the pharaohs carved their legacy into limestone. Imagine a cave, a real one, not a myth, not an image from a postcard. You are deep inside it, crouched against cool stone, and before you stretches a wall covered in ochre, ash, and rust-colored figures. Some are stick-like, others are muscular, curving. In southern Algeria, near the edge of the Sahara, they hunt, they dance, they fall, they rise. Some wear antlers, others carry drums. All are still, but none are silent. You are in Tassili Nazir. This is not the desert you think you know. 10,000 years ago, it was green, full of trees, lakes, grasslands, and life. And in that green world, people painted, not to decorate, not to show off, but to remember, to connect, to let the walls speak what their mouths couldn't. Across Africa, from the Atlas Mountains to the Drakensberg Hills, there are thousands upon thousands of caves and rock shelters filled with ancient paintings. Many of them are older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than written words, but they tell stories. The Sand People, sometimes called Bushmen, though that term is fading, created some of the most delicate, breathtaking rock art in human history. Their images are full of motion. Lean hunters chasing gazelles, women with beads dancing in circles, healers shaking as they channel spirits. But what makes these images different, haunting even, is that they weren't just drawn from life. They were drawn from the in-between. The sand believed in a world layered over this one, where animals were not just animals, but carriers of energy, where people could, through trance, enter a spirit realm, or run with eland, or meet ancestors wrapped in wind, and return. The images painted on the rocks were not literal scenes. They were visions. Figures often blur, their legs vanish, their faces shift. Some grow antelope heads, some stretch unnaturally tall. This is not sloppy drawing, this is shape-shifting. But long ago, this place was a seasonal lake, a gathering point, a sacred zone. The painters were shamans, and these were not illustrations. They were evidence of their journey between worlds. Even now, elders among the sand can describe how, in trance, they climb a spiritual rope, and you, lying back now with your eyes closed, can almost hear it. A soft drum, a chant that repeats, the hiss of breath, and the paintbrush made of chewed reed and ground red ochre moving like a whisper across stone. Now let's shift, not forward, but sideways, across the continent, to the southwestern edge of Egypt, in a place called Nabta Playa, not far from the Sudanese border. It looks like desert now, and someone, we still don't know who, built something there, including Sirius, a star deeply connected to the Nile's flooding in later Egyptian culture. A ring of stones, carefully placed, aligned to the solstice. It is thousands of years older than the Great Pyramid. It may be the oldest known astronomical alignment on Earth. And celestial timing, a web of belief that links Earth, sky, and memory. Why did they build it? We don't know. But it wasn't random. The stones marked the rising of certain stars. Some archaeologists believe the people of Nabta Playa practiced an early form of sky-watching spirituality, that they saw the heavens as a book, a calendar, a story, that when a star rose, it wasn't just light, it was a sign. And so they waited, they watched. They moved stones, not with slaves, not with kings, but with intention. Even the cattle burials found nearby suggest a connection between animals, ancestors. Travel now, in your mind, farther west to what is now Nigeria. The heat changes. The plants grow thicker. The air is alive with bird song and crickets. And buried in the soil are faces. Real ones. Heads sculpted from terracotta. Full lips, wide eyes, elaborate hairstyles. These are the famous Noak sculptures. They are over 2,500 years old. No one knows why they were made, but they are clearly human and sacred. The Noak were among the earliest sub-Saharan African peoples to smelt iron. Not bronze, iron. That's important. because in much of the ancient world, bronze came first, then iron. But in parts of Africa, iron technology emerges without a clear Bronze Age before it. This changed everything. Iron meant better tools, stronger weapons, new farming techniques, expansion. But it wasn't just a material shift, it was spiritual. In many African cultures, even today, blacksmiths are treated with awe. They are seen as liminal figures, people who shape fire and earth, who turn rock into blade, who can make and unmake. To hold iron was not just to hold power, it was to wield transformation. And in the Nokeds, with their solemn expressions and pierced ears, we glimpse a culture that believed in seeing. Not just eyes on a face, but the eyes of the ancestors. For most people, ancient Nile means Egypt, pyramids, mummies, and golden sarcophagia. But there's another Nile, one that flows upstream, toward Nubia, modern-day southern Egypt, and northern Sudan. Here, before the pharaohs built their kingdoms, people were already building tombs, crafting pottery, and burying their dead with care. The group and C group cultures practiced cattle worship and early ritual burial practices. But it was the kingdom of Kush that truly took shape in the silence of history. Let's be still for a moment. You are standing beneath a smaller, sharper pyramid than those in Giza, but no less sacred. The air smells of stone and dust. The names carved here are not in hieroglyphs. They are in Meroitic script, a language still not fully deciphered. You hear the whisper of a queen's name, Amanirines, one of the Kandake, fierce and fearless. The kingdom of Kush ruled from cities like Kerma, Napata, and Meru. They built pyramids, hundreds of them. They mastered iron before many other cultures. They traded with Arabia, Egypt, and even India. But their religion, though connected to Egyptian forms, had its own soul. They revered Amun, yes, where the gods were consulted by carrying statues on ceremonial routes, the people asking questions, the priests reading signs in the movement of the carried god, but also local deities. They built oracle temples, shaped like a cobra's hood, the uraeus, symbol of divine kingship. This was a theocracy, a land where kings ruled by divine sanction, but also with ancestral memory. One of the oldest temples of Amen in the world isn't in Egypt. It's in Gebel Barkal, in Nubia. And behind that temple is a sacred mountain. To the people of Kush, the mountain itself was a god. It watched. It waited. It was eternal. Can you feel it? That subtle shift from ritual space to sacred geography? It's not just buildings or idols. It's the land itself that holds memory. The mountain is not beneath the gods. It is the god. And India. Its coins have been found as far as the Mediterranean. We journey now to the highlands of Ethiopia, into a kingdom that rose quietly, while Rome fell and India bloomed. Axum. Most people know it, if at all, as one of the earliest Christian kingdoms. But it was much more than that. In the early centuries CE, Axum was a trading empire that connected Africa, Arabia. They minted gold. They wrote in Ge'ez, one of the oldest continuously used scripts in the world. And they carved stele, towering stone obelisks, to mark the graves of kings. But before Christianity, before churches were carved into rock, Axum's people had their own beliefs. Through a Syrian missionary named Frumentius, the transformation was not total erasure. The early inscriptions mentioned deities like Maram and Ber. They may have inherited divine traditions from Sabian influences, blending them with local spirit beliefs. What emerges is a world where the divine and political were never separate. Aksum's kings claimed solar descent. They were sons of the sun. And when Christianity came in the 4th century CE, instead, old traditions merged with the new. Even today, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church retains rituals, music, and fasts that feel older than any creed. When the priests chant in Ge'ez, it is not just scripture, it is lineage. An echo of something ancient, sacred, and very still. Stones, rivers, animals, songs, and dreams. What links all these peoples? Sand shamans, Nubian kings, Noke sculptors, Aksumite traders. It isn't a single religion. It isn't a written book. It's a way of seeing. In early Africa, the spirit world was not elsewhere. It wasn't in a distant heaven. It was layered over the real. Present in trees, there were no temples separate from life. A grandmother's grave might be more sacred than a pyramid. A painted cave might hold more truth than a scroll. This wasn't ignorance. This was integration. The divine wasn't locked in buildings or books. It breathed in the land. It walked with the people. It spoke in silence. And as you now breathe gently in your own silence, perhaps just faintly, you can hear that same rhythm. The drum, the wind, the memory of a painted handprint, left behind not as art, but as proof. I was here. I believed. I remembered. Then let us walk softly now, across oceans, over the crests of long-lost forests, the rivers of China, and drifting now into a land where history wasn't written on stone, but carried in breath, passed from mouth to ear, from dancer to sky, from fire to wind, through mists that smell of ash and maize and pine. You are leaving behind the Nile, the steppes, the Indus. The lands we now call the Americas were brimming with kingdoms and beliefs, some carved in cities, others woven into forest paths and mountain trails. This is a world where gods are carved not just into stone, but into topography. Mountains themselves are ancestors. The sky is a living map, and every harvest, every drought, every eclipse is a message from the divine. But with earth itself, the maize had a name, a spirit, and a purpose. Long before European sails touched the horizon, their name, Olmec, is given by later people. Their own name for themselves is lost to time, but their presence is not. And even now, if you listen carefully, if you really listen, you may still hear them. Then breathe in the crisp air of high plateaus and starlit skies. Let your thoughts quiet as we walk, barefoot, unhurried, into the sacred landscapes of ancient America, weighing up to 40 tons, some as tall as 10 feet. In the humid lowlands near the Gulf, the beginning of belief in these lands did not start with gods in heaven. In the Americas, everything, the wind, the jaguar, the fire, you were not above the world. You were woven into it, and nowhere is that more clear than where it all began, beneath the looming faces of stone and the silence of early time, with the Olmec. We start in what is now southern Mexico, around 1500 BCE. Here, before the Maya, before the Aztec, rose the Olmec, a civilization we still know little about, and possibly the Mesoamerican long count calendar, which would later be refined by the Maya. All connected by Axis Mundi, a cosmic tree or mountain. The shaman, often the spiritual guide, could move between these layers through trance, dreams, or ritual. They left behind something impossible to ignore. The colossal heads, each one carved from basalt, not just sculpture, but memory carved in rock, stand before one in the early morning mist. Its eyes are half closed, its lips firm, its helmet mysterious. It looks not forward, but inward. Who were these people? What did they believe? The Olmec built ritual centers, aligned with celestial movements. They used jade for sacred objects, associating it with life, water, and breath. They developed early forms of hieroglyphic writing, but deeper still was their cosmology. They believed in a world of layers, a heaven, a middle world, and an underworld. In Olmec art, you'll find jaguar-human hybrids, part man, part beast, thought to represent transformation between worlds. The jaguar was not just a predator, it was a spirit traveler. When the rains came, it wasn't just weather. It was the sky speaking. The Olmec didn't build empires. They built foundations. Now move southeast, deeper into the jungles of Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and Mexico. The thick trees part. You see stepped pyramids stretching toward the sun. Tikal, Palenque, Copan, Calakmul, Chichen Itza, recording eclipses and calculating Venus orbit with stunning precision. This is the world of the Maya. More than 2,000 years of belief, science, politics, and sacred ritual, beginning around 2000 BCE and continuing through 1500 CE. Their cities were not just for living. They were cosmic centers, aligned with planets, solstices, and cardinal directions. Every structure had meaning. Stand before the temple of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza during the spring or autumn equinox, and you will see the shadow of a serpent slither down its steps. To open portals, to balance the universe. The god descends. Time turns. The Maya worshipped gods of maize, rain, sun, wind, death, and rebirth. Their supreme creator, Itzana, was the god of wisdom and writing. But the cosmos itself was a sacred system. They believed in 3 layers of existence. The upper world, with 13 heavens, the middle world, our physical earth, the underworld, or Xibalba, a dark, watery realm ruled by gods of death and decay. To die was not always to end, but to journey. Their priests were astronomers. Their calendar systems, like the Chu, Cain, and Habi, mapped not just time, but destiny. Even writing was sacred. Their glyphs were not just letters, but living icons. The Maya believed that speech itself was divine. To write was to call the gods. Their rituals, including bloodletting by rulers, were ways to feed the gods, not in cruelty, but in necessity. In Maya belief, the cosmos needed participation. Without it, time might unravel. Now south, into the Andes. You rise high into the mountains of Peru and Bolivia, where the air thins and the stars seem closer. Before the Inca, there were others. Shavin, Mocha, Nazca, Tiwanaku, and more. Each left sacred traces. The Shavin, around 900 BCE, built ceremonial temples with labyrinths, oracle chambers, and strange fanged deities that blended human and animal. They used hallucinogenic plants, like San Pedro cactus, to access altered states, connect with spirits, and see the divine behind the veil of ordinary life. Their god, the staff god, appears in art as a symmetrical figure holding objects in both hands, surrounded by animals and storm imagery. He seems to be everywhere and nowhere. Later, The Nazca etched giant geoglyphs, the famous Nazca lines, into the desert floor. Birds, monkeys, spirals, spiders. Visible only from above. But why? Were they paths for sky gods? Ritual walkways? Calendars? No one knows for sure. But what's clear is this. To the Nazca, the desert was a canvas of faith. But it is with the Inca that we see a faith system like no other. By the 1400s, the Inca ruled the largest empire in the Americas, stretching from Colombia to Chile. But they did it not through fear, but through cosmic harmony. Their king, the Sapa Inca, was the son of Inti, the sun god. The Inca capital, Cusco, was shaped like a puma, with roads spreading outward like arteries. They called their world Tawantinsuyu, the Four Quarters. And at its center stood the Coricancha, the golden temple of the sun. Their religion was relational. Pachamama, Ilapa, and the Apis, sacred mountain spirits. They worshiped Inti. Mountains, to them, were not backdrops. They were living beings. You made offerings before traveling through them. You spoke to them. When someone died, their body was mummified and kept, not hidden away, but consulted during ceremonies. Ancestors remained part of life. This wasn't superstition. It was continuity. They did not level the mountain. They shaped the city to the stone, honoring the mountain's form, not conquering it. Inca festivals, like Inti Raymi, celebrated the sun's return at winter solstice, full of music, dance, color, and cosmic renewal. And when they built Machu Picchu, this was not just architecture. It was spiritual obedience. As the stars wheel overhead, as the jungle breathes below, as rivers whisper and mountains wait, the ancient Americas speak. They speak in languages no longer known, in rituals no longer practiced, in monuments, myths, and maze. They remind us, belief is not always loud. It does not require books. It can live in wind, in shadows, in cycles. The gods of the ancient Americas were never only in heaven. They were here, in every footprint, every fire, every falling leaf. And if you listen carefully, in the soft quiet of sleep, you might just hear them again. The river still moves, the grain still grows, but something has changed. People are no longer just surviving. They are organizing, obeying, rising above each other and falling beneath. Someone now controls the grain. Someone builds higher walls, sits higher on the platform, wears something on their head no one else can. A king. But how? And why? In the beginning, there were no kings. There were just people, clusters of them, wandering, gathering, worshiping, sometimes building. For hundreds of thousands of years, humanity lived in relative equality. No palaces, no armies, no taxes. Power was shared through elders, healers, dreamers, shamans, and story keepers. Leadership was fluid, based on wisdom, age, or courage, and always temporary. The strong protected, the skilled taught, the spiritual guided. But then, something shifted. Around 10,000 years ago, with the invention of agriculture, land became valuable. And with land came ownership. With ownership came defense. With defense came hierarchy. And with hierarchy came kings. The earliest humans didn't hoard. There was no need. What you gathered, you ate or shared. But when farming appeared, slow, uncertain, back-breaking farming, suddenly surplus was possible. More grain than needed. More meat more time. But who controlled the surplus? At first, perhaps, the community stored it together. But storing means guarding. Guarding means choosing someone to guard. And once someone guards the grain, they begin to feel it is theirs. And just like that, property is born. The line between ours and mine. The first inequality wasn't a sword. It was a silo. The first kings were likely not called kings. They may have been respected elders, organizers, mediators, until slowly, generation by generation, they stopped giving the power back. Their children inherited their role. Their image was carved. Their words became law. And when they died, they were not buried. They were worshipped. The earliest forms of kingship were sacred, not political. A king did not rule instead of the gods. He ruled because of them. He was their voice, their vessel, sometimes even their equal. Take the kings of yore in Sumer, proclaiming themselves shepherds of the people, chosen by the gods to maintain the divine order, or the pharaohs of Egypt. Not just kings, but literal incarnations of the sun god Ra. Power and holiness became one. Disobedience wasn't just treason. It was blasphemy. Kingship alone doesn't make inequality. To sustain itself, power needs a system. And so, ancient kings created writing to count grain, tax labor, and record tribute, law to protect property and punish rebellion, religion to justify hierarchy through divine will, architecture to awe, intimidate, and immortalize, myth to teach the people where they stood and why. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest surviving legal texts, wasn't a set of equal laws. It explicitly ranked people, free men, nobles, commoners, slaves, and the punishments varied accordingly. If a noble harmed a noble, they paid. If a noble harmed a commoner, they paid less. If a noble harmed a slave, perhaps nothing at all. The law didn't create justice. It codified inequality. And because it was carved in stone, it lasted. Being king wasn't just ceremony. It was expensive. You had to feed an army, build monuments, maintain priests and scribes, throw festivals, keep rivals quiet. And to do that, you needed tribute from conquered peoples, taxes from your own, and often slaves to build what no one else would. From the pyramids of Egypt to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the sprawling palaces of the Hittites, most ancient greatness was built not by glory, but by hands that were owned. Slavery wasn't an accident. It was a feature of early kingship, an engine of empire. And yet, people believed in the kings. Why? Because of the next ingredient. A crown alone doesn't make people obey. But a god in the crown? That changes everything. Kings began to tie themselves to the sacred. In Egypt, the pharaoh was the sun. In China, the emperor held the mandate of heaven. In Mesopotamia, kings were chosen of the gods. In the Andes, Inca emperors were children of the sun. Temples became palaces. Priests became ministers. Rituals became laws. The king's life was no longer his own. His words shaped crops, seasons, and life itself. And if things went wrong, floods, famine, invasions, it wasn't just bad luck. It was a sign. The gods were displeased, and the king would fall. With kingship came expansion. You had your land, but why not take more? So kings became conquerors. City-states became kingdoms. Kingdoms became empires. And so began the empire cycle, a pattern that echoes across history. Rise, a charismatic leader, new weapons, military victories. Expansion, conquered peoples pay tribute, lands grow. Consolidation, bureaucracy, roads, laws, taxes. Corruption, elites grow fat, people grow resentful. Collapse, rebellion, invasion, economic ruin. Repeat, over and over again, from the Akkadians to the Persians to the Romans to the Mauryas. Empires grew like flame and burned out just as fast. But kings kept rising, people kept building, and inequality became so normal, it felt like nature. They rose in fire, they fell in dust. Their names echo still, carved on broken tablets, lost beneath sand, or whispered through legends passed from tongue to tongue. Mesopotamia, Persia, Rome, Qin, Maurya, and dozens more vanished like dreams, but once towering, terrifying, godlike. Why did they rise? Why did they fall? And why did every single one think they had broken the curse? Welcome to Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, where the Euphrates and Tigris shaped not only farms, but futures. Here, some of the first cities emerged: Uruk, Ur, Lagish, Akkad. At first, they were small temple-centered communities, ruled by high priests and local elders. But as walls rose and water was controlled, competition began. And with competition came kings. Sargon of Akkad is often credited with founding the first true empire in history. He unified dozens of city-states under one rule, spread a common language, and ruled with a standing army, a revolutionary idea. But within a few generations, his empire fell apart. Why? Overexpansion, revolts, drought, internal strife sound familiar? Because this cycle will repeat. Again and again. The Assyrians took empire to the extreme. Brutal military campaigns, deportation of entire populations, psychological warfare, massive state-sponsored propaganda for 300 years. They dominated the Near East, extracting tribute and ruling by fear. But even fear has a limit. Their own cruelty made them vulnerable to revolt. And when the Medes and Babylonians struck back in 612 BCE, the Assyrian capital Nineveh was reduced to ash. Then came Babylon, known for its splendor, its laws, and its wonders. But it too was a revolving throne of conquests, overtaken by Persians, Greeks, and eventually swallowed by time. Every new ruler in Mesopotamia would claim they were restoring order. None could hold it. Then came Persia. Under Cyrus the Great, a new vision of empire was born. Not just conquest, but administration. Not fear, but loyalty. Allowed conquered peoples to keep their religions, respected local customs, built a vast network of roads, created the first postal service, used a centralized currency and taxation system. Under Darius I, Persia became an empire of empires, stretching from Egypt to India. It was, in many ways, the most stable and enlightened superpower of its time. But even it could not escape the trap. Succession crises, over-reliance on tribute, costly wars, elitism, and disconnect from common people. Eventually, the Greeks under Alexander swallowed Persia whole, not because Persia was weak, but because no system lasts forever. China, too, was once a land of fractured states. And then came Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. He unified warring states through sheer force, standardized writing, currency, and weights, built massive road systems, began the Great Wall, burned books that disagreed with him, buried scholars alive, created a centralized, highly bureaucratic system. His rule was brutal but efficient. And yet, within 4 years of his death, the Qin dynasty collapsed. Why? Oppression bred rebellion, huge infrastructure costs, resentment of forced labor, and cultural suppression, paranoia, and over-control. His son was overthrown. The empire splintered. And still, other dynasties would try again. Han, Tang, Song, all hoping to learn, to adapt, to avoid the fall. None did. Rome began as a small city. It ended as a myth. Republic to dictatorship, dictatorship to empire, emperors to gods, senators to puppets. At its peak, Rome controlled the entire Mediterranean, ruled over 60 million people, and built roads that still exist today. Its laws, architecture, and military structure would influence the world for centuries. But inside, it was rotting. Corruption, slavery, dependence, overextension, class inequality, debasement of currency plagues, civil wars, environmental strain. By the 400 CE, the Western Roman Empire had collapsed into fragments. The Eastern Empire, Byzantium, would limp on, but the myth of Rome was dead. Why did it fall? Because every problem was ignored until it was too late. Because the people at the top had too much to lose to fix it. India, too, birthed empires. The Maurya Empire, founded by Chandragupta Maurya in 322 BCE, united much of the Indian subcontinent. But it was his grandson, Ashoka, who defined it. After a horrific war at Kalinga, Ashoka underwent a spiritual transformation. He renounced violence, embraced Buddhism, built hospitals and wells, etched moral guidance on stone edicts across the land. It was, perhaps, the most ethical empire of its time. But it still collapsed. Why? Weak successors, decentralized administration, invasion, fragmentation. Ashoka's ideals outlived his state. Because sometimes it is easier to inspire than to govern. Long before empires stood, there were gods. They didn't descend from the skies. They rose from fields, rivers, and fire. They were the answer to hunger, to lightning, to death. And as humans built cities, they also built temples. As kings took crowns, they claimed divine right. Faith was never just personal. It was political. It was architectural. It was empire in spirit form. Let us now step into that holy fog, where belief carved borders, where sacrifice bled into soil, and where every war had heaven on its side. Before kings ruled, priests did. At sites like Göbekli Tepe, Cataluyuk, and Eridu, archaeologists have found religious centers that predate any formal state. These early temples organized labor, collected offerings, distributed grain, held land and wealth, controlled calendars and rituals. In short, they were the first bureaucracies. Temples managed time, food, law, and by extension, power. People didn't just worship there. They depended on them. This spiritual economy created trust or fear long before armies existed. In Sumer, each city had its own patron god. Uruk had Inanna Nippur, revered Enlil. Eridu honored Enki. The ziggurat wasn't just a temple. It was a visible claim to cosmic order. Kings didn't just say they ruled by force. They ruled by God's will. The line between temple and palace blurred. In some cases, kings were priests. In others, they claimed to be chosen by gods, even their children. Religion wasn't a part of politics. It was politics. No civilization blurred the line between deity and ruler quite like ancient Egypt. Pharaohs weren't just chosen by gods. They were gods. The living pharaoh was a manifestation of Horus. Upon death, he became Osiris, lord of the afterlife. This allowed for total control. Obedience became sacred duty. Disloyalty became heresy. Tombs became cosmic machines, not just graves. The pyramid, then, was a spiritual fortress, a state project built by cosmic necessity. Egypt's religion helped it maintain remarkable continuity for over 2,000 years, but it also made change nearly impossible. When the world shifted, Egypt couldn't. And so it was conquered, not by stronger gods, but by men who no longer needed to be divine to rule. In India, religion shaped society down to its bones. The Vedic religion emerged around 1500 BCE, brought by Indo-Aryan migrants. They introduced Agni, the fire god Indra, god of storms and battle Varuna, keeper of cosmic order Soma, both god and sacred plant. The Vedas, vast collections of hymns and rituals, laid out a complex vision of the cosmos. The world was held together by TTA, a kind of divine law or rhythm. Speak correct words and follow rituals precisely. To keep this order, humans had to perform yajna. Out of this cosmic worldview came something even more enduring. The caste system, rooted in the idea that society mirrored the body of the divine being Purusha. Priests equals mouth warriors equals arms, merchants equals thighs, laborers equals feet. Religion justified hierarchy, not by force, but by fate. In ancient Persia, a new kind of religion took hold under the prophet Zarathustra. He taught that the world was a battlefield between Ahura Mazda Angra Mainyu. Humans had free will, but their choices mattered eternally. This was one of the first truly ethical monotheistic religions, and it deeply influenced later faiths like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Zoroastrianism rejected animal sacrifice, emphasized truth, order, and cleanliness, promoted cosmic dualism. Kings like Darius used it to justify empire. They weren't just ruling people, they were fighting chaos itself. Religion became not just sacred, but ideological. In the ancient Near East, most gods lived in temples. But in early Judaism, a new idea emerged. One God, no image, a covenant with people, not a king. This was radical. The Israelites didn't need a palace to find God. They needed obedience, memory, and justice. Prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah spoke truth to power, challenged kings, and warned of exile not as punishment by enemies, but by God himself. In this view, political collapse was divine judgment, and survival came not through strength, but faithfulness. Early Christians were seen as dangerous. They refused emperor worship. They claimed a kingdom, not of this world. They were hunted, imprisoned, executed. But their faith spread like wildfire. Why? Its message of hope to the oppressed, its care for the poor and sick, its powerful storytelling. By the 4th century CE, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. By the end of that century, it had become Rome's state religion. The cross that once meant death now crowned emperors. The persecuted faith became a persecuting faith, and the empire that had killed Jesus now ruled in his name. From these roots grew countless holy wars. Crusades, jihads, inquisitions, religious revolts in China, India, Africa kings claimed they were defending truth, but often they were just defending power. Temples were looted, scriptures were edited, gods were nationalized, saints were weaponized. And yet, people still believed. Because even when corrupted, faith gave hope. It made suffering meaningful. It made death less terrifying. Walk the ruins of any ancient city. You'll find not just bricks, but beliefs. A broken idol, a prayer etched in stone, a tomb once filled with light. The gods may change, but their shadows remain. Because faith isn't just about gods, it's about longing for order, for justice, for eternity. And whether whispered in a temple or shouted from a throne, faith moved mountains, even if the mountains fell. Before the world was drawn, it was dreamed. Long before ships carved paths through oceans, or caravans traced silk-stained trails across deserts, humans moved, not with precision, but with instinct and awe. And the world they imagined? It was alive. Mountains held sleeping gods. Seas whispered with sirens and sea dragons. Forests teemed with spirits, curses, and miracles. They did not measure the earth. They mythologized it. Even without maps, networks grew. In China, silk spun its way westward, prized like starlight. In India, spices perfumed ships and palaces alike. In Arabia, incense burned on altars and in royal halls. In Africa, gold gleamed like the sun beneath the soil. In Europe, wine, wool, and war all traveled side by side. The Silk Road was not a single road, but a shifting braid woven through empires, oasis towns, and forgotten villages. Trade moved ideas, religions, plagues, dreams. And all of it happened without knowing what lay ahead. The sea was worse. The Phoenicians dared the deep, trading across the Mediterranean, telling tales of islands where the sun died. Indian sailors rode the monsoon winds, reaching East Africa, Arabia, and Southeast Asia. Polynesians memorized the stars and currents, no compasses, no sextants, and found specks of land across vast blue. But even seasoned sailors believed in the edge of the world. In the West, many thought the ocean fell into an abyss, or that giant serpents, fiery whirlpools, or divine gates guarded its end. What wasn't known was imagined. The first maps weren't for direction, they were for belief. Babylonian clay tablets showed the world as a circle, with rivers flowing outward like veins from the heart. Medieval Natamundi placed Jerusalem at the center, paradise at the top, and monstrous races at the edge. Chinese maps emphasized harmony, not geography, but balance between heaven and earth. The idea of accurate scale was alien. What mattered was what a place meant, not where it lay. Through it all, one truth remained. Humans always moved, not just for trade, but for hope. Not just for conquest, but for wonder. We followed rumors of better lands, sought cities of gold, crossed deserts for whispers of water. Every journey reshaped the map, even if it lived only in memory. We have walked through pain and power, through kings and temples, rivers and ruins. We've watched civilizations rise, burn, pray, vanish. And now, in this final breath, we remember what it meant to not know, to imagine, and to go anyway. Because before there were maps, there was only the traveler. And before the traveler, there was the dream. Sleep now, wanderer. Let the old world drift into mist. Let the monsters fade, and the stars light your way. You've made it through the ages, and morning is still far away.